So picture this. 4 human beings are plunging into absolute, complete silence.
Right.
They are roughly 250,000 miles from Earth, swinging around the far side of the moon. And for 40 excruciating minutes, every single communication system just goes dead.
Because the moon is literally blocking all the radio
Yeah,
waves.
exactly. I mean, in a world completely obsessed with instant connectivity, where we honestly panic if our phones drop a signal for like 10 seconds, these 4 astronauts are entirely, profoundly cut off. Welcome to the deep dive.
It's an incredibly evocative image to start with, especially given the stack of sources we're looking at today. All our material is dated April 7, 2026.
Yeah, and it's a dense stack today.
It really is. And while only one of those stories is about that lunar blackout, that image of a system being pushed to its absolute limit, where the connection is tested, severed, or fundamentally altered, that is the exact connective tissue running through everything we have today.
And that's our mission for this deep dive. We are looking at a landscape filled with landmark legal judgments, geopolitical brinkmanship, and massive technological upgrades. We want to map out how our most critical systems, our justice system, democracy, security, and infrastructure, how they all function when placed under extreme stress.
Absolutely.
I mean, what happens when the protectors of a system become the threat, or when the supply chains those systems depend on are suddenly held hostage by geography? Now, as always, a quick note to you listening. We are strictly neutral here. We are merely unpacking the source material and not endorsing any political viewpoints. Okay, let's unpack this.
Well, to understand systems under stress, you really have to start with the most fundamental system of all, which is the social contract.
Right.
It's that basic agreement that the state holds the monopoly on violence, but strictly in exchange for protecting its citizens. When that contract breaks, it's not just a localized failure. It threatens the entire architecture of a society.
Which brings us directly to our first source. This is a truly landmark judgment out of Tamil Nadu that tests the absolute boundaries of that contract.
It really does.
The first additional district in Sessions Court in Madurai has just sentenced 9 policemen to death.
Which is the maximum possible punishment under the law.
Yes, for the custodial torture and murder of a 58-year-old trader named P. Jayaraj and his 31-year-old son, Jay Benix. This happened back in June 2020 at the Satankulam police station in the Thoothukudi district.
Yeah.
I really want to linger on the facts here because they are grim, but they are absolutely crucial for understanding the systemic failure.
The facts, as established by the Central Bureau of Investigation, the CBI, and affirmed by the court, paint a picture of completely unchecked power. These 2 men were detained for allegedly violating COVID-19 lockdown rules.
Wait, I need to emphasize that for a second. They weren't accused of a violent crime.
No, not at all.
They were detained because they allegedly kept their mobile phone shop open past the lockdown curfew. That was the infraction that initiated this entire horrific chain of events.
Precisely. And Judge G. Muthukumaran, who presided over the case, explicitly noted that these 2 men were unarmed. They had absolutely no criminal antecedents.
Right.
There was no provocation that justified even an escalation of force, let alone what actually followed. The CBI established that on June 19, 2020, Jayaraj was picked up as part of what the court deemed criminal conspiracy.
And then his son Benix rushed to the police station. Right.
Yes, he naturally objected to his father being beaten, and then both were wrongfully confined.
And the details of what happened inside that station overnight are horrifying. I mean, they were brutally assaulted, quote, to teach them a lesson. They were forced to clean up their own blood.
Yeah.
And this is where it stops being just the localized act of violence and becomes a full systemic cover-up. They actually forced a sanitary worker to clean the premises to destroy the biological evidence.
That cover-up attempt is exactly why the judge used a profoundly evocative phrase in his judgment. He condemned the brutality as an act of vengeance.
Which is a heavy term for a judge to use.
It is. But more importantly, he noted that these perpetrators were educated, mentally sound, salaried public servants. They were supposed to be the guardians of the law. He actually described them as the fence eating the crop.
The fence eating the crop. That metaphor just perfectly captures the collapse of the social contract. I mean, you build a fence to keep the predators out to protect the harvest.
Exactly.
When the fence itself turns inward and consumes what it was designed to protect, the entire logic of the justice system just collapses.
And that's why the procedural mechanics of how this case survived are so vital to understand. In a standard scenario, if the local police are the perpetrators, they are also the ones who control the initial intake of evidence.
Right, they control the crime scene.
They write the first information report. The system is designed to fundamentally trust them. So when they're the criminals, the system naturally tends toward burying the truth.
So how did this not get buried? I mean, what broke that cycle?
It was the intervention of a higher parallel system. The Madurai bench of the Madras High Court took suo motu cognizance of the matter.
Okay, let's break that down for the listener. Suo motu means on its own motion.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Usually, a court waits for a petition to be filed by a victim or an advocate before it looks at a case.
Sure.
But when a situation is so egregious, so threatening to the public trust, that waiting for a petition might actually result in the destruction of evidence, the court can essentially act as its own petitioner.
Oh, wow. That's a powerful tool.
It really is. They bypass the standard bureaucratic delay and seized control of the narrative. Eventually, they transferred the probe to the CBI to ensure an independent investigation, completely away from the local state police machinery.
It's basically the ultimate systemic failsafe. The local police system failed catastrophically, so the higher judicial system forcefully intervened.
Yes.
And the judge's 400-plus page judgment doesn't just treat this as an isolated incident in a small town. He placed it within a massive global context, specifically referencing other incidents of custodial torture, including the George Floyd case in the United States.
By referencing George Floyd, the judge is signaling that this isn't just about 9 rogue cops in Toothukudi. It is about the universal vulnerability of the citizen against the state.
Right.
The state government argued that custodial deaths are fundamentally intolerable, and the central government, through the CPI, sought the maximum punishment. The judge ultimately concluded that a mere life sentence would be insufficient. He argued the death penalty was necessary as a systemic deterrent.
But this raises a profound philosophical issue, and I really want to push back on this idea of deterrence. We know the history of the death penalty is fraught, both statistically and morally.
Definitely.
When a state applies the ultimate irrevocable punishment, executing its own rogue agents, does that actually serve as a systemic deterrent? Or, by applying such extreme absolute finality, is the state merely engaging in another formalized version of that act of vengeance the judge himself condemned?
That is the exact debate legal scholars will be having about this judgment for decades to come. Let's look at the mechanics of deterrence. Deterrence relies heavily on the assumption of a rational actor.
Right, that someone pauses and thinks it through.
Exactly. It assumes a police officer is about to commit an act of brutality, pauses, calculates the legal probability of receiving the death penalty, and then logically decides to stop.
Which, based on the CBI's own findings, is absolutely not what happened here. This was driven by ego, by a localized altercation over a mobile shop, by a desire to, quote, teach them a lesson. It was an exercise of absolute power in a closed room fueled by adrenaline and complete impunity.
Exactly. Does the distant threat of the gallows penetrate the immediate psychology of a group of officers who firmly believe they control the very system that would investigate them? Probably not.
Right.
Statistically, criminologists often argue that the certainty of being caught is a much stronger deterrent than the severity of the punishment. But the systemic message the court is sending here is undeniable.
And what is that message?
The judiciary is attempting to violently reestablish the boundary of the social contract by applying the most absolute consequence it possesses. It is a system screaming, "We will not allow the fence to eat the crop."
It's the ultimate stress test of accountability. But let's shift our focus from the accountability of the police to the accountability of our democratic machinery itself.
A huge pivot, but very relevant.
Because right now, in West Bengal, the system that determines who actually gets to participate in that social contract, who actually gets to vote, is buckling under massive administrative strain.
We are looking at enormous protests surrounding voter list deletions ahead of the April 23rd and 29th Assembly elections in West Bengal.
Yeah, our sources describe these serpentine queues forming outside administrative offices across multiple districts. Thousands of residents have suddenly found their names deleted from the electoral rolls during a process called the Special Intensive Revision, or SIR.
Right.
And with just weeks left before polling, they are frantically rushing to file appeals.
To understand the chaos here, you have to look at the bureaucratic mechanics of how a voter roll is actually maintained. The Election Commission routinely updates these lists to remove deceased voters, duplicates, or individuals who have relocated.
Which is standard hygiene for a democracy.
Exactly. The SAR process is just a hyper-accelerated version of this. Booth-level officers go door-to-door, cross-referencing databases.
But the execution here seems to be causing systemic trauma. I mean, in the Basarhat subdivision alone, locals allege nearly 700 voters from just 3 specific booths were wrongfully removed.
That's a massive number for just 3 booths.
It is. And that sparked immediate road blockades and tire-burning protests. In Katwa, you have long lines stretching outside the subdivisional office, requiring central security forces to manage the crowds.
And what is causing the maximum frustration is the administrative paradox these citizens are caught in.
Yeah.
Imagine you are a citizen, right? You show up to an administrative office holding a valid Indian passport.
Which is one of the highest tiers of citizenship documentation you can have.
Exactly. You have an Aadhaar card with your biometrics registered. You might even have a receipt showing you previously appeared for an electoral hearing. And yet the system's database says you simply don't exist as a voter.
It's totally Kafkaesque. How does that technical disconnect even happen? How does one government database say you have a passport, but the electoral database just deletes you?
It often comes down to data siloing and algorithmic flagging.
Hmm.
The Election Commission's database might use a slightly different spelling of a name, or maybe a different address format than the Aadhaar database.
Ah, so a tiny discrepancy.
Right. If the Aadhaar software runs a cross-referencing script and finds a mismatch, or if a booth-level officer visits a home when the resident is at work and marks them absent, the system can automatically flag them for deletion.
Ah.
Then the burden of proof violently shifts onto the citizen to prove they exist and reside there.
And the physical infrastructure to handle these appeals is clearly overwhelmed right now. To manage these voters whose status is currently under adjudication, the system has scrambled to set up 19 tribunals across 23 districts.
That's a massive rollout.
Yeah, and these aren't just low-level clerks. These tribunals are headed by former High Court Chief Justices and senior judges.
Which is a massive logistical undertaking. But it's barely containing the frustration on the ground. The tension has already boiled over into physical confrontation.
Right.
Our source highlights a dramatic incident in Malda district where 7 judicial officers were literally held hostage, a garau, for over 9 hours by residents protesting these deletions.
A garau is a very specific type of protest, right? It's not just a march, it's a physical encirclement.
Yes, it is a tactic of physical detention by a crowd. The crowd surrounded the officers, trapping them, demanding immediate rectification of the voter lists.
That sounds incredibly intense.
It was. The situation was so severe that the Chief Justice of India, Surya Kant, publicly condemned the garau, calling it a direct challenge to the Supreme Court's authority. The National Investigation Agency, the NIA, is now probing the incident.
So you have the NIA investigating a crowd that was essentially just trying to get their voting rights back. And of course, because this administrative breakdown is happening precisely during an election cycle, the entire mechanism of voter verification is instantly transformed into a political weapon.
Naturally.
Both major parties are spinning the systemic failure to their advantage.
We have Trinamool Congress leader Kunal Ghosh strongly criticizing the process, accusing authorities of intentionally leaving voters in a state of uncertainty. He's explicitly pledging his party's support to those seeking restoration, framing this as an attack on legitimate citizens.
On the other side, you have BJP leader Dilip Ghosh leaning into a completely different narrative. He's reiterating his party's long-standing claim that the voter rolls are bloated with what he calls illegal voters.
Right.
He's estimating nearly 1 crore, that's 10 million names, need to be purged, asserting that the final list will vindicate their stance on illegal immigration.
It is a profound clash of narratives over the very definition of a citizen, playing out through the mechanics of a database purge. Is the system disenfranchising legitimate voters through sheer administrative incompetence and algorithmic errors? Or is it rigorously excising an illegitimately bloated roll?
It's so hard to untangle.
It is. The tribunals are beginning to deliver outcomes, though. For instance, they just restored the name of a Congress candidate from Farakka who had been deleted. But the sheer volume of pending appeals creates an environment of massive democratic anxiety.
Which leads us perfectly to another facet of electoral accountability. Not the accountability of the voter proving who they are, but the accountability of the candidate proving what they own. Let's move to Assam.
Yes, the Assam Congress has submitted a formal, high-stakes petition to the Election Commission, demanding the immediate cancellation of Chief Minister Himanta Biswa Sarma's candidature.
And the core of the allegation is a failure of transparency. They allege that the chief minister deliberately failed to disclose offshore assets belonging to his wife, Riniki Buyan Sarma, in his mandatory electoral poll affidavit.
Let's look at the legal architecture of this accusation. The petition, which is supported by heavyweights like former Chhattisgarh Chief Minister Bhupesh Baghel, claims these assets involve properties in Dubai and shell companies registered in Wyoming in the United States.
I really want to pause on Wyoming, Most people hear offshore assets and they think of, the Cayman Islands or Switzerland. Why Wyoming?
It's a fascinating legal quirk, actually. Wyoming has incredibly robust corporate privacy laws. It allows for the creation of limited liability companies, or LLCs, with strict anonymity for the beneficial owners.
So it's a shield.
Exactly. It's often used legally for asset protection, but in the context of political disclosures in another country, it creates a massive black box. The Congress is arguing that utilizing this black box is a deliberate, willful, and corrupt suppression of information.
And they're anchoring this argument in the Representation of the People Act, 1951. How does the electoral affidavit actually work as a systemic tool?
The logic of the affidavit was established by the Supreme Court to empower the voter. When a candidate files their nomination, they must submit a sworn legal document detailing their criminal history, educational qualifications, and, crucially, a comprehensive list of all movable and immovable assets and liabilities.
For themselves and their family, right.
Yes, for themselves, their spouse, and their dependents. The underlying philosophy is that a voter has a fundamental right to know the financial ecosystem of a candidate, to accurately assess potential conflicts of interest once they are in power.
So the argument is that if a candidate hides a shell company in Wyoming, the voter is basically flying blind regarding who actually holds financial leverage over that candidate.
Exactly.
But we have to note clearly here that Chief Minister Sarma has categorically dismissed these questions. He has called the allegations fabricated, completely baseless, and purely politically motivated ahead of the election.
Which leaves the Election Commission as the system under immense pressure. They have to navigate these highly publicized competing claims, verify international corporate structures, which is notoriously difficult, and uphold the integrity of the electoral process in the final phase of campaigning before the April 9 polling in Assam. What's fascinating here is how these three stories, the death sentences in Tamil Nadu, the overwhelmed voter tribunals in Bengal, and the affidavit battle in Assam, all revolve around a desperate struggle to enforce accountability.
Yeah, they really do.
Whether society is trying to hold a police constable accountable for murder, a voting tribunal accountable for accidental disenfranchisement, or a sitting chief minister accountable for global financial transparency, the institutional machinery we've built is just groaning under the weight of these demands.
And that strain rarely stays confined to courtrooms and administrative forms. It often manifests physically. When the theoretical integrity of our laws and our democratic processes is questioned, it almost inevitably spills over into the physical and rhetorical security of the institutions themselves.
That's a really good point.
Which brings us to a perfect example of that physical spillover. While we were just talking about the theoretical boundaries of the law, the literal physical boundary of the Delhi Assembly was just breached in the most bizarre theatrical way imaginable.
On the afternoon of April 6, a masked man driving a car with the Uttar Pradesh registration number forcefully rammed through gate number 2 of the Delhi Assembly premises.
He didn't just bump it either. He broke right through the iron security barrier of one of the most secure political zones in the capital.
Yeah.
But this is where the story pivots from a standard, terrifying security threat into something highly symbolic and honestly deeply strange. He didn't jump out of the car with a weapon. He drove up to the office porch of Assembly Speaker Vijender Gupta, stopped the car, and meticulously placed a flower bouquet on the porch.
After leaving the bouquet, he attempted to reverse and retreat, at which point he was immediately swarmed and arrested by security personnel. The driver has been identified as Sarbjit Singh from Pilvet district in UP. 2 other individuals connected to the incident have also been detained for questioning.
I look at the mechanics of this incident, and I honestly can't help but think of it as a physical penetration test. In the world of cybersecurity, massive corporations hire white hat hackers.
Right, to test their defenses.
Their entire job is to try and break into the digital network using whatever exploits they can find, strictly to expose the vulnerabilities before a malicious actor finds them. This guy in Delhi feels like the physical equivalent of that.
It really does.
It's a completely bizarre act, leaving a bouquet of flowers, but it ruthlessly exposes a very real, very dangerous physical vulnerability in an architecture that is supposedly locked down tightly.
That's a highly accurate way to frame it, actually.
Yeah.
And it's exactly why investigators are treating this as a top-tier incident requiring deep psychological and tactical analysis.
Yeah.
You have to contextualize the breach.
Right.
The Delhi Assembly had recently received a series of threat messages during its budget session.
So the system was supposedly already operating at a heightened state of alert. The guards were supposedly ready.
Exactly. And yet, A single individual in a civilian vehicle simply accelerated and smashed right through the perimeter. So law enforcement is analyzing multiple vectors here. Was this driven by a personal, hyper-localized grievance? Was it a convoluted political message? Was it an act driven by psychological instability?
Or, like you said, a calculated test.
Right. Or, as your analogy suggests, was this a deliberate, calculated provocation designed specifically to test the response times and compromise the security protocols of the capital's police force?
The fact that he wore a mask to conceal his identity, yet brought a bouquet of flowers, indicates a real level of premeditation and a desire for symbolic impact. It is the theater of security. The act itself wasn't violent beyond the destruction of the gate, but the message it broadcasts to the entire political apparatus is terrifying. It's saying, your perimeter is an illusion and I can get in here whatever I want. It essentially forces the government to completely audit their physical architecture.
And that concept of the theater of politics, how security threats are utilized, amplified, and broadcast, is currently playing out on a much larger, much more volatile scale back in West Bengal.
Yes, moving from a localized physical breach to a massive international rhetorical breach. West Bengal Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee is currently demanding the immediate resignation of Prime Minister Narendra Modi.
And the catalyst for this sudden demand is a highly provocative statement made by Pakistan's Defense Minister, Khawaja Asif. In a recent interview, Asif explicitly threatened that Pakistan would respond with a military strike on Kolkata in the event of any future misadventures by India.
I mean, that is a direct named threat to a major eastern Indian metropolis from a neighboring nuclear-armed power.
It's a huge escalation in rhetoric.
And Mamata Banerjee's argument is essentially one of political hypocrisy. She is arguing that the prime minister frequently targets Bengal with aggressive rhetoric during his domestic election speeches, but when Pakistan literally threatens to obliterate the state capital, the central government remains entirely silent.
Trinamool Congress General Secretary Abhishek Banerjee heavily amplified this narrative. He pointed out the specific irony of the situation, claiming that while the BJP leadership often campaigns in West Bengal by labeling marginalized local populations as infiltrators and national security threats, they sit as mute spectators when an actual foreign military power threatens Kolkata. He accused the central leadership of only weaponizing the state apparatus and security rhetoric against domestic political opponents, rather than addressing actual international threats.
To be clear again, we are purely analyzing the mechanics of the political rhetoric here. The Prime Minister's office had not issued a formal response to the Pakistani minister's statement at the time our sources were published.
Right, that's important to note.
But what is mechanically fascinating is how an international geopolitical threat is instantly synthesized and weaponized within a hyper-local election campaign.
It's an absolute masterclass in narrative shifting. In an instant, the threat from Pakistan completely overshadowed the usual localized debates over municipal water, local corruption, or infrastructure. Pakistan, despite being geographically on the complete opposite side of the subcontinent from Bengal, suddenly became the absolute center of the political discourse in Kolkata.
Because the TMC is using it to flip the script. The BJP traditionally campaigns heavily on a platform of strong national security. The TMC is using this specific threat to portray the BJP as weak on national security when it comes to defending Bengal, thereby positioning themselves, the regional party, as the true, robust defenders of the state's physical existence.
It perfectly illustrates how global geopolitics doesn't exist in a vacuum. It is constantly filtered, distorted, and leveraged through the lens of hyperlocal electoral battles.
And we see the inverse of this exact dynamic, using global realities to manage local politics playing out in Gujarat.
Yes, at the BJP's 47th Foundation Day celebrations at the party headquarters, Sri Kamalam in Gandhinagar.
Gujarat Chief Minister Bhupendra Patel addressed a massive gathering of party workers there. Now, the event started with standard, aggressive local political theater. State BJP President Jagdish Vishwakarma launched a very aggressive attack on Congress President Mallikarjun Kharge.
And the context for Vishwakarma's attack is that Kharge had allegedly made remarks calling Gujaratis illiterate and foolish. Vishwakarma seized on this, framing the alleged insult as evidence of a deep-seated Gujarat Virodi mindset, an anti-Gujarat mindset within the opposition.
It's a classic strategy, right? You rally the local base by highlighting an external insult.
Definitely.
But then Chief Minister Patel takes the microphone and he completely pivots. He moves away from the localized grievance and shifts the focus to the macro-level stability of the entire nation. He emphasized the BJP's overarching nation-first ideology.
Right.
And crucially, he specifically urged his party workers to remain calm and focused, openly noting that the ongoing escalating tensions in West Asia were creating severe global ripple effects that were directly impacting India.
This is a highly strategic pivot by the chief minister. Let's analyze what he's doing mechanically here. By acknowledging the ripple effects from West Asia, Patel is actively addressing a silent anxiety within the electorate.
What kind of anxiety?
Well, he knows that global oil prices impact the cost of diesel, which impacts the logistics of transporting food grains, which then impacts the price of vegetables in a market in Ahmedabad. He is preemptively addressing inflation fears.
That makes total sense.
He explicitly reassured the public that despite these global ripples, the supply chains for essential commodities in Gujarat food grains, electricity, water, petrol, and diesel remain perfectly stable and heavily managed.
So he is projecting the image of a secure, highly competent system amidst a sea of international chaos. He literally told his workers, this is not the time for politics, cautioning them against reacting to misinformation and urging them to focus purely on governance.
So you have two radically different applications of global instability.
Yeah.
In Bengal, Mamata Banerjee highlights global instability to attack the central government's competence.
Right.
In Gujarat, Bhupendra Patel acknowledges that exact same global instability to highlight and project the central government's competence and systemic resilience.
Both are reacting to the exact same underlying truth, which is that the physical world outside India's borders is incredibly dangerously volatile right now.
Yes, it is.
So what does this all mean? Well, it logically means we need to trace those global ripples back to the stone they were cast from. If local leaders in Gujarat and Bengal are constantly adjusting their domestic political strategies based on events in West Asia, we need to look at the actual epicenters of that international tension.
We're moving to the global chessboard, where physical geography dictates macroeconomics. And right now, the most critical square on that board is the Strait of Hormuz.
The situation here is deteriorating rapidly. Iran has just formally rejected a comprehensive ceasefire proposal, insisting they will only accept a permanent end to hostilities with ironclad guarantees against any future attacks.
And Iran's rejection collides directly with a massive, highly publicized ultimatum from U.S. President Donald Trump. He has set a hard deadline, April 7th, 8 p.m. Washington time, for Tehran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz.
Let's really explain the geography here for a second, because the Strait of Hormuz isn't just a body of water. It is a systemic choke point for the entire planet.
It is arguably the most vital strategic waterway in the world. It's an incredibly narrow passage of water separating the Persian Gulf from the Gulf of Oman and the open Arabian Sea. At its narrowest point, the shipping lanes are only about 2 miles wide in either direction.
And what actually flows through that tiny 2-mile gap?
Under normal global circumstances, roughly 20% of the world's total oil supply moves through the Strait of Hormuz. We are talking about tens of millions of barrels of crude oil every single day, carried by massive supertankers originating from Saudi Arabia, Iraq, the UAE, and Kuwait.
So if a military conflict closes that strait, if those tankers can't physically pass through because of mines or missile threats, the economic terror is instantaneous.
Absolutely.
You don't just lose oil, you lose the baseline energy that powers global manufacturing. Prices skyrocket globally overnight, supply chains freeze, and localized inflation explodes. This is the exact global ripple effect that the Gujarat chief minister was warning his party workers about. The price of a tomato in Surat is tethered to the free passage of ships in Hormuz.
And the volatility is compounding by the hour, honestly. Just before Iran's formal rejection of the ceasefire, Israel executed a highly targeted massive strike on a petrochemical plant located in the South Pars natural gas field.
We need to unpack South Pars because it's not just a random field in the desert.
No, South Pars is the largest natural gas field on the planet. It's a massive geological formation located in the Persian Gulf, and crucially, it is shared territorially between Iran and Qatar. For Iran, it is the absolute heart of their energy infrastructure. The gas extracted from South Pars provides the vast majority of the fuel for Iran's domestic electricity generation grid.
So an attack on South Pars is an attack on the Iranian grid itself. The strike reportedly killed 2 senior commanders of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Israel was very explicit in its messaging. They stated the goal was to cripple a vital revenue stream and energy source for Tehran.
And this strike appears to have happened independently of Trump's pressure campaign, but it throws gasoline on the exact same fire. We also just saw reports of U.S. and Israeli strikes killing the intelligence chief of the Revolutionary Guards.
The pressure on the Iranian system is existential right now. And then you add Trump's rhetoric, which is characteristically absolute. He publicly warned that if Iran doesn't adhere to the 8 p.m. deadline and reopen the strait, the U.S. military would, quote, set the country back to the Stone Ages. I have a very serious question about the mechanics of this diplomatic strategy, though. When you are dealing with a conflict where both actors view the outcome as entirely existential, where the regime believes that losing means total collapse and the end of their governance, does imposing a strict, highly publicized deadline accompanied by a threat of absolute annihilation actually force a resolution?
That's the million-dollar question.
Because structurally, you are leaving the opponent with zero face-saving exit ramp. If they comply, they look weak and lose domestic legitimacy. If they don't, they invite destruction. Doesn't the psychology of an ultimatum just guarantee an explosion?
That is the precise debate dominating the war rooms in Washington and allied capitals right now. Historically, ultimatums are effective when there is a massive asymmetry of power, and the weaker party has a rational, survival-based incentive to yield quietly. But when you are dealing with national pride, deep ideological survival, and advanced asymmetric retaliatory capabilities, like Iran's ability to unleash proxy forces across the region or mine the strait, an ultimatum can simply box both sides into an inevitable military confrontation.
They just get stuck.
Exactly. Neither side can back down without suffering catastrophic political damage at home. It becomes a game of diplomatic chicken where the steering wheels have been thrown completely out the window.
And yet, even when the steering wheels are gone, there are always back channels. Our sources mention that Mojtaba Firdousipour, who is the head of Iran's diplomatic mission in Cairo, revealed that Iran actually conveyed its formal response to the U.S. through Pakistan.
Oh, interesting.
Furthermore, Omani officials are quietly working on a multilateral mechanism to administer the strait,
Which highlights the absolute necessity of regional mediators who sit slightly outside the immediate blast radius. Both Pakistan and Oman share deep geographical, historical, and diplomatic ties with both Washington and Tehran.
so they can act as a bridge.
Yes. They are uniquely positioned to relay messages without the baggage of direct hostility. What Oman is proposing is a technocratic solution, a shared administrative mechanism for the physical shipping lanes, to try and de-escalate a deeply ideological and military crisis. They are essentially trying to fix a political fire with bureaucratic water.
It's all about securing your neighborhood. If the house down the street is on fire, you make sure your own roof is wet, which is exactly what India is doing right now on its eastern flank. Let's move from the choke point of the Middle East to the strategic geography of the Indian subcontinent.
India has just signaled a major, highly calculated strategic reset in its relationship with Bangladesh.
Indian High Commissioner Pranay Verma just held a critical meeting with Bangladesh's newly elected Prime Minister, Tariq Rahman, in Dhaka.
The diplomatic messaging coming out of this specific meeting is highly coordinated and very deliberate. Both sides are emphasizing a positive, constructive, and forward-looking approach. High Commissioner Verma spoke extensively about converting their shared geographical proximity into tangible economic linkages, enhanced connectivity, and renewed cultural exchanges.
Which, to a casual observer, probably just sounds like standard, boring diplomatic boilerplate. But you have to look at the immediate historical context to understand the magnitude of this shift. Relations between New Delhi and Dhaka had severely, dangerously deteriorated under the previous interim government led by Muhammad Yunus.
The Yunus era was characterized by intense friction. Following the ouster of Sheikh Hasina, Yunus had strongly criticized India for providing her with sanctuary, and his administration repeatedly and publicly demanded her extradition.
Yeah.
The anti-India rhetoric in Dhaka reached a fever pitch, and the interim administration routinely dismissed New Delhi's deep concerns regarding reports of targeted attacks on Hindu minorities in Bangladesh, simply calling the reports exaggerated.
And the Indian system didn't just absorb that rhetoric quietly. It responded with aggressive structural leverage. India effectively froze the relationship. They suspended the crucial transshipment of Bangladeshi exports through Indian territory.
Let's explain transshipment really quickly. Bangladesh relies heavily on moving goods through Indian infrastructure to reach global markets efficiently. By freezing that, India essentially created a localized economic choke point.
Exactly.
Furthermore, India temporarily closed its visa centers in Bangladesh, citing severe security concerns for its personnel. It was a rapid, calculated freezing of diplomatic and economic lifeblood.
And nature abhors a vacuum. During this deep freeze, Pakistan immediately attempted to exploit the geopolitical space in Dhaka. They sent senior officials on high-profile visits, attempting to reestablish influence. So India was suddenly facing a nightmare scenario, right? A historically friendly neighbor with whom they share a massive, porous border was becoming openly hostile and actively courting regional rivals.
But the election of Tariq Rahman has violently flipped the script back. Rahman has instituted a pragmatist Bangladesh-first policy. And interestingly, what is best for Bangladesh economically aligns almost perfectly with India's regional security goals. If we connect this to the bigger picture, you can see why this reset is the absolute top priority for New Delhi. When the macro-global picture like the escalating war in the Middle East and the threat to the Strait of Hormuz is wildly unstable, a nation simply cannot afford instability on its immediate physical borders.
Right, you need your backyard to be secure.
Exactly. India is actively, aggressively securing the BBIN sub-region, that's Bhutan, Bangladesh, India, and Nepal. By integrating their economies and logistics, India creates a resilient bloc. We even saw concrete military evidence of this reset. Bangladesh actively participated in the IOS Sagar maritime military exercise held in Mumbai just days ago.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, India is essentially locking down its local geography, building a unified neighborhood to buffer against those global economic and security ripples we've been tracking.
It makes perfect, ruthless strategic sense. If the world outside is unpredictable, the only rational response is to build incredibly robust, self-reliant infrastructure at home. You can't control the Strait of Hormuz, so you upgrade your own hardware.
Exactly.
And that brings us to the architecture of tomorrow. We are going to look at how India and the world are upgrading their systems across energy, technology, and space. Let's start with a monumental, honestly physics-defying achievement in India's quest for energy sovereignty.
India's first indigenous 500-megawatt prototype fast breeder reactor, or PFBR, located in Kalpakkam, Tamil Nadu, has successfully attained criticality. Prime Minister Modi immediately hailed this as a defining historic step for the nation.
To understand why the Prime Minister is using such grand language, we really have to delve into the actual physics of this machine and the grand strategy of India's nuclear program. Now, criticality is a term we hear a lot. It simply means the reactor has achieved a steady, self-sustaining nuclear chain reaction. The reactor is officially on and stable.
Right.
But it's the type of reactor, a fast breeder, that makes this revolutionary.
It fundamentally alters the math of nuclear fuel.
I was trying to come up with a mechanical analogy for what a breeder reactor does, and the best I could think of is this. Imagine you're driving a specialized car down the highway. As the engine burns its standard fuel to move the car forward, the chemical heat and pressure inside the engine block are simultaneously manufacturing a completely new, higher-grade premium gasoline.
Okay, I see where you're going.
And it is actually manufacturing more of this new premium gas than the standard fuel it is currently burning. That is essentially what this reactor is doing at a subatomic level, right?
That is a remarkably accurate, though obviously simplified, analogy for the physics at play. Let's look at the actual mechanics. A conventional thermal nuclear reactor consumes fissile material that burns it up. A fast breeder reactor also consumes fuel to generate heat. In the case of the Kalpakkam reactor, it uses a uranium-plutonium mixed oxide, which is known as MOX fuel.
Okay.
But here's the magic. The core of the reactor is physically surrounded by a blanket of uranium-238.
And uranium-238 is the incredibly common but non-fissile isotope, right? It doesn't actually burn in a normal reactor.
Correct. It's essentially nuclear waste in a standard setup. But in a fast breeder, there is no moderator like water to slow down the neutrons. The core violently bombards that blanket of uranium-238 with high-energy, fast neutrons.
And then what happens?
When a U-238 atom captures one of these fast neutrons, it transmutes. It literally changes its atomic structure, decaying over a few days into plutonium-239. And plutonium-239 is an incredibly potent fissile fuel, so the reactor breeds more new fuel in the blanket than it consumes in the core.
It sounds like alchemy, but it's just brilliant, perfectly engineered physics. And this specific machine represents the crucial second stage of India's grand three-stage nuclear strategy, a vision that dates all the way back to the founding father of the Indian nuclear program, Homi Bhabha.
Bhabha's strategy was born out of pure geological necessity. India has very limited domestic reserves of naturally occurring uranium. which is why the country has historically relied on complex, politically fraught international imports to run its Stage 1 conventional pressurized heavy water reactors.
Right, which leaves you vulnerable to global supply chains.
Exactly. However, India possesses vast, globally significant reserves of thorium in the monazite sands along its southern coastlines.
But you can't just put thorium into a reactor and turn it on, can you?
No, you can't. Thorium is fertile, not fissile. It needs a catalyst. Stage 2, this fast breeder reactor we are discussing right now, creates the massive stockpile of plutonium-239. In the future Stage 3, that plutonium will be used alongside thorium to breed uranium-233, which will finally unlock those vast domestic coastal reserves.
So the PFBR is the indispensable bridge to total perpetual energy independence. And the fact that this incredibly complex machine was designed and built entirely within India, featuring critical contributions from over 200 domestic industries, including numerous MSMEs supplying specialized valves, pumps, and sensors, is a massive validation of the Atmanirbhar Bharat, or Self-Reliant India, initiative.
It really is.
We are literally engineering our way out of the geopolitical vulnerabilities we discussed earlier.
And we're applying that exact same philosophy of upgrading domestic engineering to our most vital physical transportation networks as well.
Yes, moving from subatomic transmutation to the literal iron tracks of the Indian railways. The government has just formally approved projects worth over 1,364 crore rupees to radically accelerate the rollout of the Kavach automatic train protection system and to modernize the underlying communication signaling across the network.
Let's break down what Kavach actually is. Kavach, which translates from Hindi to armor, is an indigenously developed anti-collision system. Its primary function is to automatically take control and apply the brakes if a locomotive pilot fails to notice a red signal, if the train is speeding dangerously, or if the system detects another train occupying the same track block.
The new approvals include installing the latest iteration, Kavach version 4.0, on 232 locomotives operating in the Southern Railway. But what really caught my eye in this specific source isn't just the software on the trains. It's the massive foundational infrastructure being laid down to support it.
What kind of infrastructure?
Well, the Northern Railway is spending hundreds of crores to lay thousands of kilometers of advanced fiber optic cables to create a dedicated LTE communication backbone across zones like Ambala, Delhi, and Lucknow.
This is where we see the absolute merging of 19th century heavy machinery with 21st century digital networks. Historically, global train systems operated on block signaling, relying on physical colored lights beside the tracks and manual human communication to ensure two trains weren't in the same block.
Right.
It was fundamentally prone to catastrophic human error, fatigue, or poor visibility.
But Kavach completely changes the paradigm. It doesn't rely on a driver seeing a light in the fog.
Exactly. Kavach requires constant microsecond-level data exchange. RFID tags embedded in the physical tracks transmit location data to the train. The train then uses ultra-high-frequency radio, or an LTE network, to communicate its exact speed, braking distance, and location to a central server and to other trains in the vicinity.
So you simply cannot have an automated algorithmic safety system if the train loses its internet connection for even a few seconds while hurtling at 130 kilometers an hour. The physical safety of thousands of passengers is now entirely, inextricably dependent on the robustness of a digital fiber optic communication backbone. The invisible software network is becoming the literal physical armor for the hardware.
And speaking of massive digital infrastructure, the data that fuels all of these systems, from railway logistics to banking to basic communication, has to physically live somewhere. And somewhere is increasingly looking like the state of Andhra Pradesh.
This is a staggering development. Google is formally beginning construction work on April 28th on a $15 billion with a B data center hub in Andhra Pradesh.
According to the regional reports, this massive influx of capital is set to become India's largest single foreign direct investment project to date, and it will establish the region as Asia's biggest data center cluster.
We are talking about constructing 3 distinct hyperscale campuses located in the vicinity of Visakhapatnam, specifically in Adavivaram, Tarluvada, and Rembili. The scale of this engineering feat is just hard to comprehend. The combined planned capacity of these data centers is 1 gigawatt.
To put 1 gigawatt of power consumption into perspective, that is roughly the energy required to power a moderately sized city, entirely dedicated to running and cooling computer servers.
That's insane.
The physical infrastructure required to support a facility of this magnitude is immense. Raiden Infotech India, which is Google's local subsidiary, along with their infrastructure partner Adani Infra, are not merely building large warehouses for server racks.
No, because a data center is useless if it can't talk to the world, right?
Right.
They have to install 3 high-capacity armored submarine cables. They have to build dedicated, hyper-secure cable landing stations on the coast. And they have to lay down massive metro fiber networks to connect the campuses.
Visakhapatnam's geography is the critical factor here. Because it sits right on the eastern coast, it is the perfect location for landing those massive submarine cables that literally connect the global internet across the ocean floor.
Oh, that makes sense.
By positioning these hyperscale centers here, Andhra Pradesh is aggressively asserting itself as a primary global hub for cloud infrastructure. The sheer volume of information, the digital lifeblood of millions of citizens, corporate logistics, and government services will be physically flowing through the cooling systems and fiber optics of these specific buildings.
We're building perfect, highly automated, massive systems here on Earth to manage our lives. But humanity's ambition and our engineering doesn't stop at the atmosphere.
Which brings us to our final technological leap, NASA's Artemis the mission. This crew has just made the closest lunar approach by human beings in over half a century.
The telemetry numbers from this mission are just awe-inspiring. The 4-person crew broke the absolute record for the farthest distance ever traveled from Earth by a human being, reaching a distance of 252,756 miles. During their closest orbital pass, they skimmed just 4,067 miles above the lunar surface.
The crew described looking out the window and seeing the moon appearing roughly the size of a basketball held at arm's length. It's a profound shift in perspective.
Yeah.
And amidst all the high-tech astrophysics and orbital mechanics, there was a deeply resonant emotional moment. The crew officially named a bright, newly cataloged lunar crater Carroll in honor of Mission Commander Reed Wiseman's late wife.
It beautifully grounds this sterile, multi-billion-dollar endeavor in raw human emotion. You have this diverse crew: Commander Wiseman, Jeremy Hansen, Christina Koch, and Victor Glover, who represent several historic firsts for gender and racial representation in deep space exploration.
They do.
And during the mission, they received a recorded audio message from the legendary Apollo astronaut Jim Lovell, officially welcoming them to his old neighborhood.
It's the literal passing of the torch to a new generation of explorers. But here's where the story intersects perfectly with our overarching theme of systems and communication. Down here on Earth, we are spending $15 billion to build Google data centers just so our streaming videos buffer a millisecond faster.
Right.
We are laying thousands of kilometers of fiber optic cable so our trains have uninterrupted, perfect LTE safety connections. We are utterly obsessed with instant, frictionless, constant communication.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. During the Artemis flyby, as the Orion capsule passed behind the far side of the moon, the crew experienced a mandatory 40-minute communications blackout.
Absolute terrifying silence.
Yeah.
The physical mass of the moon completely blocks all radio telemetry and voice signals back to Earth.
Yeah.
For 40 minutes, those 4 human beings were entirely, profoundly cut off from the 8 billion people back home.
Yeah.
They had to rely entirely on the automated life support systems of the capsule and their own rigorous training.
And what I find so fascinating is that despite all the modern cutting-edge imaging systems, the LiDAR and sensors on that spacecraft, NASA mission scientists explicitly noted that they continue to rely heavily on human visual assessment.
How so?
Well, the human eye, attached to a human brain, is still unmatched in its ability to quickly detect subtle geological anomalies. Like when the crew was visually spotting the rugged terrain of the Oriental Basin, we build these perfect billion-dollar automated machines, but we still desperately need the human eye looking out the window to make sense of the universe.
Which perfectly sets up our final, perhaps most humbling segment. Because after spending the last hour analyzing humanity's intense attempts to build perfect systems, whether it's enforcing laws in a courtroom, conquering nuclear transmutation, laying global submarine cables, or sending life support capsules around the moon, we have a story that provides a stark reminder of what we absolutely cannot control.
We look at the IPL match at Eden Gardens, Kolkata Knight Riders taking on the Punjab Kings, a highly anticipated clash that was ultimately watched out.
The teams managed to play exactly 3.4 overs before a persistent heavy rain forced the umpires to abandon the match, forcing both franchises to split the points.
The irony of this specific washout is just delicious to me. You look at the Indian Premier League, it is a multi-billion-dollar sports and entertainment industry.
Oh, massive.
These franchises employ entire departments of data analysts with PhDs. They track every single variable, Player matchups, historical strike rates, biomechanics, and highly localized meteorological models. The planning is as meticulous as a military operation.
And yet, despite all that data, human psychology and chaos theory intervene. KKR's captain, Ajinkya Rahane, made a very bold, counterintuitive, and data-defying choice at the toss.
What did he do?
He chose to bat first in heavily overcast, humid conditions. And crucially, he fielded a playing exile without either of his world-class frontline mystery spinners, Sunil Narine or Varun Chakravarthy, due to a combination of sudden illness and a minor injury.
It was the first time since 2020 that KKR had taken the field without either of them, and Rahane's decision to bat first in those conditions backfired spectacularly within minutes. Punjab Kings pacer Xavier Bartlett expertly utilized those swing-friendly, heavy, overcast conditions to absolutely demolish KKR's top order.
The mechanics of swing bowling rely on humidity and atmospheric pressure. Bartlett found the perfect line. He removed Finn Allen and Cameron Green almost instantly. He boasted figures of 2 wickets for just 9 runs.
Ouch.
KKR was reeling, completely destabilized at 25 for 2 inside of 4 overs. They were staring down the barrel of a humiliating, mathematically disastrous defeat.
But then the uncontrollable variable arrived, the rain cloud, the sky opened up, flooded the Eden Gardens outfield, and the match was abandoned. That random meteorological event literally saved KKR from a likely disaster, granting them their first point of the season via the washout.
You can draft the perfect team. You can build the most modern, digitally connected stadium. You can run a million Monte Carlo simulations on player matchups. But a passing cumulonimbus cloud still dictates the final outcome of a billion-dollar enterprise.
It's the ultimate reality check for systems designers everywhere. The universe always holds a veto. And that brings us to the end of our journey today. We've covered a massive, complex expanse of human endeavor today.
We really have.
We started with the heavy, tragic burden of justice and the mechanics of accountability in Tamil Nadu, and the immense administrative strain of democratic voting tribunals in Bengal.
We examined the fiscal and rhetorical security of our institutions, analyzing a crashed gate in Delhi and how global geopolitical threats are instantly weaponized in local elections. We mapped the terrifying economic leverage of the Strait of Hormuz and India's rapid strategic realignment in our own neighborhood with Bangladesh.
We marveled at our astonishing technological progress. Engineering fast breeder reactors to transmute our own nuclear fuel, weaving digital fiber optic safety nets for our railways, pouring billions into global data hubs in Visakhapatnam, and literally stretching our legs into the silent void around the dark side of the moon.
But through all of these massive, intricate systems, the undeniable through line is always the human element. It's a high court judge demanding absolute accountability from a broken police force.
Yeah.
It's a politician weaponizing fear for a vote. It's an astronaut naming a crater out of grief and love. Or a cricket captain making a flawed instinctual decision at the toss that is ultimately saved by the rain.
The systems, the laws, and the machines are just the stage. Human behavior, our flaws, our brilliance, our unpredictability is always the narrative.
And that leaves me with a final thought for you to mull over as you go about your day. Today we talked about incredible machines reactors that breathe their own fuel in spacecraft, that plunge into absolute calculated silence behind the moon. But as we continue to build these increasingly automated, supposedly flawless systems, from Kavak algorithms on our railways to 1 gigawatt AI data centers, are we slowly engineering a future where the human element becomes an obsolete liability? Or will our flaws, our emotions, and our sheer chaotic unpredictability always be the one vital spark that a machine can never replicate?
A brilliant question to leave off on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the invisible systems around you, keep looking for the connections, and we will see you next time.